Hey, I'm Ryan Steller with Standard Care, and with me is Mike Martinelli. This is the Standard Care Briefing, and today we're going to talk about how human resources can now track you through your Oura ring as reported into Slack, which is the worst idea ever. An update on Ozempic, the blockbuster weight loss drug, and how it might finally have some side effects or some drawbacks that are worth considering. And then we're going to close out with just a regulatory update that talks a bit about a recent data breach at a major hospital in Boston, as well as some updates from the federal government, final updates from the federal government on information blocking. With me is Mike Martinelli. Mike, how you doing today?
Good. Everything's going well over here in Philly. A little hot. I-95 collapse, but, otherwise, everything's good.
Governor Shapiro got it back, right? Isn't it already?
Yeah, they just finished like the temporary, like makeshift, whatever thing it is, until they could fully rebuild the highway.
Is it okay? So it's okay. So it's not finalized. It's not final. There's more to go.
Oh yeah, this is like a temporary, like, I don't know what you call it, makeshift. I mean, I don't want to say makeshift because it's heavy traffic. It's a main artery in 95, but it's something that they're going to keep there until they could actually rebuild the actual road/bridge that collapsed.
Okay. And I saw a bit of the press conference, and Gritty, the Flyers mascot, was not there, unfortunately. So
he goes to like everything, not the Philly fanatic. It's like the Gritty just like shows up at Jefferson. He shows up at everything going on in Philly. But
yeah. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a product announcement, a product or feature release that came from a collaboration. I guess it's kind of a dual launch, a collaboration between the wearable, which is it's a ring that you can wear that tracks your vitals and collects numerous biomarkers, produced by a company called Oura. And on their For Business blog, they introduced the Oura for Slack integration. And what this is it takes the biomarkers from the Oura ring, wraps it up into a score about readiness, I guess, and then reports it real time as part of your status indicator in the workplace chat app Slack. Now, Slack is very popular with remote first teams, and it's very popular in tech and with startups. So I guess the positioning of this feature release is that you're going to get to know your teammates better by understanding their physiologic status. However, as a lot of people on Twitter have pointed out already, this is kind of like a clearly dystopian kind of weird thing. Yeah, I don't know why they're doing this. I mean, I get it, but I'm not sure I think it's a good idea. I guess, Mike, do you have any insights on why anybody would do this with their life and choose to broadcast how well they slept last night?
Well, the only thing I could, possibly come up with is that the person whose idea this was probably very, very fit and wants everyone in extremely healthy, perfect slate of health, and wants everyone to know that. So they want to wear their Oura ring and have all their vitals data, health data, go onto Slack so all their coworkers can know how really fit and healthy they are. But what really gets me is, I mean, aside from the big, elephant in the room here that they're sharing it with all your coworkers on Slack, is the ranking system. There's they rank you based on, I don't know, like what, certain vitals or certain health data points go into this, but there's optimal, which is a crown. Then you get a green, which is good. And then yellow is fair. And then red is pay attention, is what they call it. I think that's referring to pay attention to that employee, ask them if they're doing all right, because that's what the article is saying. Like, they want you to know if, your coworkers are, feeling under the weather. Why? It's up to them whether or not they should, have their everyone else in the office know if they're feeling under the weather.
Yeah.
Broadcast it on Slack.
Yeah. Yeah, this is man, their heart's in the right place. The R ring is not exactly a clinical grade product. They do have a fair amount of like publications. I think it counted 22 on the website. So there is some scientific basis for the product and the composite score that it's producing, but the social aspect is pretty bizarre. It's very clearly something we would identify as a dystopian, I think. And
Maybe it
the
is
peer,
actually a social experiment. Sorry to interrupt.
so
It's
yeah,
social
maybe,
aspect.
yeah. I wonder. I don't know. I hope they keep us updated on this because it seems like it's going to be an obvious flop, but I'm sure there's also going to be teams that are going to be excited to do this. I think if your CEO is 25 years old, they're going to be excited about this, and then you're going to feel a lot of pressure to do it. But I think if your CEO is over 40, they're probably going to definitely not adopt this. Um, I don't know. I think it would be interesting just to have human resources broadcast their score, and then everybody else can learn about how to judge them from a distance. They should have to live with the judgment. Human resources in the C-suite should have to live with the judgment for a year before they impose it on anybody else in the team.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like also like problematic. It's like very ableist. I don't know. This is
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. And for the policy wonks at home, is this PHI? Is this a HIPAA violation, Mike?
No, because even though it's health data, it's not PHI because it is not collected or not obtained in the course of receiving healthcare treatment from a covered entity. For example, the
Mm-hmm.
covered entity in most of our experience is a physician, nurse practitioner, PA. So it doesn't fit any of that criteria. So it's not PHI.
And is it
However,
a
it could.
health breach?
Uh, yeah, this could. I don't have one of those, but I'm assuming like if you had your own personal Aura ring, it syncs to an app on the phone and which records the data. I would assume, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
assuming that's the case, because you'd have to see your vitals data, that would fall under FTC because that would be a personal health record. It's health data that you're collecting yourself and managing yourself, but it's
Yeah.
for a commercial purpose ultimately.
Yeah. All right. Fascinating. Let's see how that goes for them. All right. In Ozempic. So Ozempic, we're using the commercial brand name Ozempic, but actually it's the drug is semaglutide, which is a GLP receptor agonist. And what this does is it increases the sense of satiety by reducing uh, gastric emptying. So it kind of holds stuff in your gut, and so you feel more full. And then that creates side effects, gastrointestinal side effects we won't go into. But they're usually generally pretty mild, and then the effect in the long term are incredible weight loss. And this is part of a long series of drugs. There's been various GLPs. We talked about them on a prior episode. They're overall they're pretty safe, but Ozempic and semaglutide, and then tirzepatide, the kind of the emerging successor, have shown massive weight reductions and used by celebrities and approaching what is essentially a miracle drug for the epidemic of obesity and diabetes and heart disease in the Western Hemisphere. But it's always been this thing like what are the downsides? Like what's going on here? And Mike, it sounds like there might be some actual side effects.
Yeah. So there's so an adverse or how I should phrase this is the European Medical Medicines Agency issued what's called a safety signal. So what that is that it's when there is like a new or known adverse event that may be potentially caused by the medication, in this case, Ozempic, and it requires further investigation, meaning more studies, more analyzing data, um, data on patients who've been taking this drug, and then properly, setting it up into a proper research design. But what a safety signal is, it's not like you're not even at the point yet where you're thinking about recalling. What happened was there's a group of researchers. There's a couple of studies that came out where they looked at pretty large patient population groups, and they found that for patients who have been on Ozempic, I think it's for at least over 1 year. I forget the exact time frame, but they're taking it regularly, and it's for the primary diagnosis is type 2 diabetes. So it's not like a weight loss. They're looking at just a weight loss population, and they found that there were these adverse events of what was occurring was an increased incidence of thyroid cancer. They noticed a correlation, but that correlation, again, is not significant enough to say, like, okay, this is a real adverse event that we need to report to the regulatory agencies to get a recall. It's something that popped out that's alarming enough that, like, we have to look at this more. And what it could end up doing, it doesn't necessarily mean that if they continue to see it that they're gonna recall it. It could just affect how it's administered, in terms of like dosing and spreading out the dosing. There's so many factors you have to look into, but this is not something to be alarmed at yet. Anytime you have a newer medication, you're always going to find some type of adverse event, and many times it might not have anything to do with the medication. There could be other variables at play, especially at this stage.
Yeah, and we should say that this applies to drugs. The signal included drugs from Eli Lilly, AstraZeneca, Sanofi, and Novo. I think Novo and Eli are probably the companies that come up the most associated with this category, but Novo's stock is down a little bit. And it does not mean the medicine caused any reported adverse events, though. Is that correct?
No. Cause, the only thing, you don't really use cause in this, even if there was confirmed adverse, like in a population confirmed adverse event, you would have to say, like, there's a significantly strong positive correlation that, like, if you were to take drug A, there is a very good real chance that you will have this adverse event.
Okay.
Because if you say cause, that means that every time you do it, it has to have the result of an adverse event. So, like, what the studies are trying to see is if they could find a strong correlation between.
Yeah. So both, and just to clarify the situation in the U.S., it looks like both the EMA and the FDA in the United States mention Wegovy's label that semaglutide causes thyroid tumors in rodents, but says the effects on humans are unknown. And the FDA advises against taking Wegovy if the patient has family history of thyroid cancer. So that's not like very, very actionable. I don't think that's going to change very many people's behaviors, is what I'm thinking. The companies have until July 26th to submit additional information. I'm not sure if the EMEA will, when or if the EMEA will release that information. Hopefully they do. So we'll see what happens. I'd be curious to know if it's anything significant. The side effect profiles still seem very, very acceptable. So, yeah. All right, cool. And then finally, wanted to wrap up on kind of regulatory update. There is a massive regulatory update on information blocking, and we keep track of information blocking in healthcare because is one of the key changes in institutional behavior, whether it's a hospital or a doctor's office or insurance company, that increases friction. So if you're a patient or a consumer and you're wondering why things do not seem synced up, it's because they're not, and it's because of the ability of institutions to hold on and kind of hoard your data. And they're either doing that because they don't have the capacity to share it effectively, technological capacity, or they have a financial incentive to hold on to it. So, in the centralized ways in which it's all managed currently, that can't be overcome by you as an individual generally, even though you have rights to this data. So, the federal government is working on how to make this data more available. But the counter side of that is this Harvard Pilgrim data breach, which was pretty fantastic. So there's this countervailing forces. You see these big hospitals continue to have breaches, and then the government asking for better sharing, and this all speaks to technological competency. So Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare is sued for a data breach. So in April, ransomware attack that compromised data, so PPI and PHI of 2.5 million people, has led to multiple class action lawsuits against the Massachusetts-based health plan and parent company. So that's absolutely gigantic. Mike, I didn't get a chance to read the whole article. Did you have a chance to digest much of this?
Yeah. So just there's often a common misconception that you can sue under HIPAA if your private health information is disclosed. Whenever there's a lawsuit in a case like this, it involves a HIPAA violation. Personal data was disclosed without authorization. The lawsuit is not being taken under HIPAA, under a provision in HIPAA that says, like, oh, you have a right of action to sue under HIPAA. It has to do with what I would imagine. It doesn't say this in the article, but if I was trying the case, I would say like Harvard Pilgrim or whatever healthcare system that this was failed in their duty to properly take the necessary measures to safeguard their patients' data. And when I say data, I mean like social security numbers and things that could actually have an adverse effect on someone's livelihood. So
Yeah.
and you see that a lot, like a major healthcare institution in the area where I don't want to name it because there's only a handful. I mean, it's not usually their fault. I've had so many years of my life where I had free identity theft monitoring because I was working or going to school somewhere where there was a HIPAA security breach. So one of the common things they do is they say, you get 3 years worth of free ID theft monitoring. I guess if it's something that's more egregious, which it sounds like this is, there could be some monetary compensation as well. It's class action, so they're going to get some monetary compensation. That'll vary depending on how many claim it or people are going to claim it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the a clarification of what the breach was. But generally with a ransomware, yeah, so an identity was overtaken. A root administrator, somebody who had high level permissions in the system, and then the ransomware person locked out anybody else who could who could kick them out, and then held the system hostage, which is, I don't know. Well, let's go read the case. So it's Tracy Wilson versus Harvard Pilgrim. So I guess Tracy is the lead plaintiff in the class action. Is that how you'd say it? 4-count lawsuit makes similar claims and alleges the violations of HIPAA security rule. The lawsuit also takes issue with the time it took the defendants to detect and report the breach. So this kind of, I think there's a general thing here, which is hospital and healthcare systems. I've been on the spent 3.5 years working in hospitals, and there's the posture towards security is user experience is destroyed by security. It's hard. Good security makes user experiences difficult. So you often see people, writing down plain text passwords or not using a password manager. I'd say that's still extremely common. Like it's actually the best practices for how to manage passwords are still not common for a lot of people. So using a password manager, using randomly generated passwords, rotating key master passwords or whatever are still not common. So this is a shame. I'm bummed for the patients in here. I used to go to this health system. I might be in here, just realizing that. Yeah, pretty wild. Okay. And then kind of on the counter side to that is the static nature, the inertia of how data are handled and how that creates friction in healthcare is creating motivation from the government to do enforcement, right? And we have this final ruling. If you want to talk about that, Mike?
Yeah, so they just, it was a couple of days ago, HHS, so it was released by OIG, Office of the Inspector General, posted the final rule for the information blocking law, specifically regarding its penalties. And the penalties here are civil monetary penalties, which we refer to as CMPs. So this is the final rule. So that means that it already went through like the notice and comment rulemaking process. They issued a notice. People commented on it. They sent out a proposed rule. Took into consideration all the other comments and input, and then this is the final rule. So now that we have a final rule, this is what's going to go to it's in the agency right now, in HHS, to become written into an actual regulation. So regulations that are in the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, which is what is going to be used to enforce it. So just like all of our other, such a common theme in federal healthcare laws, aside from the criminal ones, that your penalties are CMPs, and it's always a matter of trying to figure out what the right way to structure the penalty scheme is, because you always have to balance that. Like, you don't want to, especially when you're dealing with in areas with health data, that areas where you would see budding innovation, you don't want to go in a direction that would stifle innovation, but then again, you don't want to go in a direction that would make it so that like a major healthcare system would be like, all right, I'm not going to waste all this money and human resources on implementing proper security measures, since the fines aren't that bad. I spend less money on fines than taking the effort to safeguard my my data and my my whole network. So like, what's going to happen is it's going to become a regulation. Regulations always get litigated, so once that's over, they're going to see how this plays out. And there's just like, so HIPAA, when that first started getting enforced, we eventually had the high-tech amendments. Was it 2013, 09, 13?
High-tech was 2010.
Yeah. 2010. Yeah, so the high-tech, what's relevant to the HIPAA security rule is the amendments to the civil monetary penalty structure. So I'd imagine sometime down the line, a few years, depending on how this plays out, there's going to be amendments to this rule specifically for the penalties. So there's going to be, you can't really predict how it's going to play out. So there's going to be an amendment, I'd imagine, sometime down the line if it doesn't function the way they want it to. So
Yeah, and there's a really solid graphic that they published with this that lays out the decision tree or thought workflow.
oh yeah.
So if you're interested in this topic, I'd definitely look that up. I think the thing that is, if you're a consumer, the thing you want is you want perfect security and perfect data flow, right? So your data is never breached, and then your data is available everywhere that you want it to be available. The thing that's slightly disappointing that I took away from the summary graphic, Mike, was OIG still has a fair amount of discretion in what they enforce. They don't necessarily, it's not going to be 100%. They have enforcement discretion. So what will be the likelihood of adoption or the rate, like what will be the rate of adoption? How long will it take? How quickly will behavior change of the vendors and everything? Do you have any way for people around the space to like estimate that or to like think about it? Will it be 100% immediately? No, right?
So there's, I mean, usually, so once this becomes a regulation, there's usually a great grace period. And when I say grace period, it doesn't mean like, okay, you could go break the law, do whatever you want. That means that there's a period of time where um, OIG, HHS is going to like reach out and like be open and willing to work with you, and like you could admit to them that like, or I mean, not intentionally admit like, hey, we have this kind of practice set in place. Is this, am I violating the information blocking law, and would this result in penalties? And they, during that, early on that grace period, they would tell them, whether they are or not. So say, for instance, they were, and they would say why, and they're like, this is what you have to do in order to comply, come back into compliance. And then they'll say like, this is what we're going to be looking for when we enforce this law. What they do, like, there's always enforcement discretion, but few big things that stuck out were there for this final rule were their enforcement priorities. So this kind of gives you guidance, like early on guidance on what is going to factor into them actually pursuing enforcement. And there's like 4 or 5 bullet points that they list that could trigger their enforcement discretion, so to speak.
Yeah. 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 I was chatting with somebody earlier today, and they were from outside of healthcare, and they wanted to get a deep dive. So they actually did an internship with a hospital in Chicago, and they sort of realized that hospitals really don't care about the details of a thing as long as it's happening. So the areas for improvement are in the weeds compared to what most people are looking at and caring about. And that gap is, in my mind, that's like that suggests that they should like outsource some of this stuff to platforms where more of it's like turnkey and automatic. But it appears to be handled in a more custom and kind of one-off fashion in a lot of these organizations. And I mean, Harvard Pilgrim must do billions and billions of dollars of revenue. I don't even know. And somehow they're not finding the resources to train people and, get the right set of like cultural training and technological pieces in place to prevent a ransomware attack. A lot of these ransomware attacks are not very sophisticated. That's the other thing that's I think a lot of people should know about this stuff is they're not always extremely well thought out. Sometimes they're very opportunistic. So the Windows hardware, software, that institutions use have a lot of gaps. Maybe it's not patched. Maybe it's out of date software, whatever. So it's prone to having automated attacks or scripted attacks for penetration testing and seeking and finding penetration points of weakness in the overall network. And I haven't read any the specific incident report from this, so I don't have any judgment or opinion on it or specific knowledge. But it feels like there's a consistent theme around the urgency and complexity of delivering care, juxtaposed with operations, getting more efficiency in supply chain, getting better security, getting better flow of data, getting whatever. And I don't know. I'm empathetic towards that because that is definitely the more important thing in a hospital is delivering care. But I'm hoping that there's a shift forward because this stuff it's bizarre that this stuff is still happening alongside all of the inefficiency in healthcare that's driving, you know, trillions, hundreds of billions of potential waste or whatever. So, all right. I think that's enough from me. Mike, do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Uh, Nothing aside from hope everyone has a nice 4th of July weekend. I know it's going to be storming here in Philly most of the weekend and at the shore as well, so we'll make the best of it.
Nice. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday.